Good afternoon. Whenever I'm asked to talk about cryopreserved samples, the conversation seems to start, have a middle and an end around cryo billing, which is incredibly interesting. But what do we find with cryo billing? We find there's invoices, manual tasks, complicated patients who are perhaps years out of their consent. And that generally means a lot of lab burden for you guys in the clinic. What we have with the Embryo Options platform is an opportunity to automate and streamline and support the patient so they can make easy payments, and we see an increase in collection rates. We see a decrease in debt, but actually what we really see is a reduction in the amount of work that you guys in the clinic have to do. But billing is just one part of the story. It's just one part of our puzzle. Actually, with more and more samples being frozen, more and more tanks coming into the clinic, what we see is a need to be able to think about what are we going to do with those samples? What are the regulations with those samples? How do we contact patients? How often do we contact patients? What type of paperwork do we need? And this is where the Embryo Options platform really steps up. So we've been able to add an additional module to our platform to look at just this. So we're able to add automation and streamlining to the consent part, helping you to become compliant. Now here in the UK, we are quite lucky in the clinics. So we have a very descriptive process of how we have to handle the consenting procedure. And I'll hand over to one of our embryologists who has a huge amount of experience in this area. This is Stacey.
Thank you, Julia. So let's deep dive into how automation can support cryomanagement using the UK as an example. First, I'll give you a quick overview of consenting and cryomanagement in the United Kingdom. Now, the UK is regulated by the HFEA, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority. The consent start date is usually the date of the embryo freeze. And in the UK, embryos can be stored for up to 55 years, as long as the patient reconsents every 10 years. Now, there are strict rules that fertility clinics must adhere to in order to remain compliant. And this includes sending up to 3 statutory notifications at specific time points, as indicated in the chart above. 1, 2, 3. As you can imagine, managing these statutory notices is a huge job for all of the patients that have embryos in storage at the fertility clinics. So how can Embryo Options help? Well, let's start from the beginning. You're in the lab and you're freezing embryos. You're going to input those freeze events into your EMR. The following night, those freeze events are pulled into Embryo Options, and the following day, somebody from your clinic can log in, review those freeze events, and approve the consent period they would like to link to those freeze events in Embryo Options. So here we have example patient Julia Thomas. She had embryos frozen on the 17th of February 2025, and she's consented to 10 years of storage. You can see a timeline that's been created by Embryo Options, and it looks very similar to the timeline I shared with you previously. But this timeline is specific to Julia's embryo freeze. On the timeline, you can see the dates the statutory notifications are scheduled to go out. Now, here's the clever part. When those dates arise, Embryo Options will auto-populate the notifications and automatically send them to the patient. So it doesn't matter if the patient is on annual leave, it's the weekend, perhaps they're off sick. Those statutory notifications are going to go out. If they're delivered successfully, a tick will appear in the Embryo Options timeline. If Embryo Options is unable to deliver those notifications, this will be highlighted to the clinic by an exclamation mark. And this automation continues until all 3 statutory notifications are sent, or until the patient renews consent, or until the embryos are no longer in storage in accordance with the clinic's EMR.
Thank you, Stacey. And so you say to me, well, that's great for the UK. They've got this process and you can support them. But I'm not in the UK. I'm in Spain. I'm in the Netherlands, I can see in the audience. And our processes are very different. And that's where we're going to be able to support you as well. So it doesn't matter if you have to consent on a number of years or whether you have a different role, you will be able to configure the program to suit your regulatory body, your clinic, or your country. So it might be that you have to renew every so many years. It might be that you're in a country that's split by regions and you have to have different rules for each of those regions, so we can separate that. Or it might be that you're in a country where you have to sort out the consent based on the age of the patient. Regardless of what your needs are, you're able to build a consent process to suit you. So you might want to ask, shall I send a consent notification? How many should I send? When should I send them? How do I have to save that so I can prove my due diligence of what I did? All of that can be built by you, and then you can build a library of them. Perhaps you only need one for your region. Perhaps you need two, different ones for gamete, different ones for embryos. Everything can be built bespoke, unique to what you need. One of the great things, you said you had a favourite part when you were talking that. This is my favourite part. This is the dashboard that tells you everything that's going on. I call it the command centre. Because everything that you've got going on here, where are patients with their consent status? Who has replied? What reports do I need to pull? What is my daily work list? This platform will automate sending everything out. Is there something extra that I'd like to do? I can pull it from here. Have patients not replied and not renewed? I can pull it from here. So really giving you the ability to take control of what's going on with the consent status of your patients. Lastly, if patients no longer want to store their gametes or embryos with you anymore, and that's because they're coming to the end of their cryo storage journey, and perhaps if it's allowed within your clinic and if it's allowed within your country, we can provide information to the patient so they can start investigating what the end of their cryo storage looks like. We can provide education and information. They can access that whenever they want. So no need to phone the clinic. We know patients phone often more than once, so they can access this as many times as they like. They can download the relevant forms if you want them to. They can e-sign them. So they can send these back to you and send that clear message of what they need to do, all at their own time and at their own pace. So we started this conversation around cryopreserved samples in that cryo billing, always where it starts. But actually, we want to think about your experience with this. We want to keep you ahead of all of the regulations and the requirements that people have. And actually, we want you to be supported with how you put a compliance program together. So while you're there thinking about cryo billing, we would very much like to think about cryo management so you can focus on what you do best, and that's looking after your patients. Thank you. Thank you, Stacey.